You're casually scrolling through your Instagram stories, and all of a sudden you swipe to the next story and an ad pops up for a nearby job opportunity. You quickly jump at the opportunity to make some quick cash, as anyone would, right? And it takes you to one link, you fill out some stuff, one thing leads to another, and then you're asked to meet at a random secluded spot in the middle of nowhere where there's no one else. Do you take it or do you leave it? Believe it or not, even though the safe option is to leave it, a lot of people might still take up this opportunity, and it leads to a lot of people that could be hurt, scammed, or even worse, into human trafficking incidents. Today, I'll be going over the questions: what is human trafficking? Who does it affect? How can we stop it? And why should we care about the whole situation in the first place? And for those of us who are unfamiliar with human trafficking, it has an estimated number of 2.6 million victims worldwide at any given time. And this is from the U.S. Department of State, who also tells us that human traffickers prey on people of all ages, backgrounds, and nationalities, exploiting them for their own profit, which is one of the big reasons why everyone should care about it. And it's not a problem that's just certain people, but it's a problem for everyone. Over the course of today's speech, I will first be going over the definition of human trafficking for those of us who are unaware, and then I'll touch on the groups of people it can affect. After that, I'll give solutions to the problem of human trafficking in our communities and in our state and in our country, as well as tell everyone why we should care about it in the first place. Like I just said, first off and foremost, I want to share with everyone what human trafficking is for those of us who may know. And even though that may come to a surprise to some people that people don't know, it's the truth. Human trafficking can be defined as the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain some sort of labor or commit a sexual act, as stated by the Department of Homeland Security. The Department of Homeland Security also tells us that over millions of people are involved in human trafficking incidents every year, making it a problem that affects more families than we know, maybe even our own, and there's people that haven't stepped forward to talk about it. Now, I also know that people have this way of thinking where they think to themselves, oh, I don't know anyone who that's happened to, or I've never had it happen to me, so I think I'm in the clear. I don't need to worry about that. But it really isn't that simple at all. What happens most of the time is that people are in vulnerable positions in their life, whether it be emotional vulnerability or even physical vulnerability where you're injured and can't make a run for it. People can be easily manipulated into doing something that they won't normally do. And an article by UNICEF tells us that mass displacement, conflict, extreme poverty, lack of access to education and job opportunities, violence, and harmful social norms like child marriage are all factors that push individuals into situations of trafficking. And those are just to list some quick situations that you might be vulnerable in that might lead you into a human trafficking incident and might make it easier for people to become victims of this. However, this vulnerability that people might find themselves in certain times in their life doesn't just mean that those situations have to make them vulnerable. It could also be their age that makes them vulnerable. Did you know that globally, children comprise 20% of all reported human trafficking cases? However, in countries like Africa and Asia, that percentage is closer to 100% of the victims, according to the United Nations. And now, I'm sure that a lot of us are on the younger side, and not all of us may have children or even younger siblings, but imagine if it was your child or your younger sibling. How would you feel about it? And this means that those stories that you hear of human trafficking happening to those younger kids or little kids or our siblings, that even then, it doesn't mean that it could just happen to them, but it could happen to any one of us as well. And that's why it should be of the utmost importance to try to put an end to the extreme amounts of human trafficking that goes on in our country. With this begs the question, what are the things we can do to end human trafficking? And on top of that, people still may be asking, why should I care in the first place? As mentioned earlier, traffickers try to target people who are in vulnerable positions that make it easier for them to be manipulated. And although most of the time this is meant for emotionally vulnerable people, this can also go for physically vulnerable or even global people online. And one of the ways that people get tricked, like I had mentioned in the example at the very beginning of this, was that it could even be like a false listing on a shopping website or an ad on social media for a job listing. And technology and human trafficking avoid the trap. It gives us different steps on how to avoid falling for human trafficking scandals online. Some of the steps they give us are to set privacy settings, don't overshare in social media, beware of strange friend requests especially, and lastly, beware of false or too good to be true advertisements. And with these steps being considered that I believe we all should consider, there are also things we could do to protect others from human trafficking and not just protect ourselves. The U.S. Department of State has an article where they give us 20 different ways that we can help to fight human trafficking. And some of the most impactful ways, in my opinion, were to volunteer and support anti-trafficking efforts in our communities, to write to the local and state, federal elected officials to find out what they're doing on the job and to push them to do more, to join fundraisers to help human trafficking victims, and lastly, to encourage schools to implement a protocol for possible human trafficking situations on their campus. To me, I feel like the most important one of these was the last one I had mentioned about implementing a protocol for students when there's such human trafficking incident reported nearby or that actually happened nearby. And that I think that even though everyone's a priority in the fight against human trafficking, I do believe that the youth is of utmost importance in this situation and that they should come first, because at the end of the day, they are the future of our country and we should be serving to protect them first. And even with this all being said, people still might be wondering, how does this affect us? How does it affect me if I've never been in a situation like this? Well, just because you've never been in a situation like this doesn't mean you never will be. And that's not to say that you will. However, it just means that you should still be aware of it anyway and be careful with it. The U.S. Department of Education wrote an article on why. And in that article, they tell us that no community, school, social economic group, or student demographic is immune to the threat of human trafficking. Cases of child trafficking are found in every area of the country, in rural, suburban, and urban settings alike. This just shows us about why we should all care about human trafficking, not only protect others, but to protect ourselves. And today, I hope everyone has learned something about what human trafficking is, as well as its effects, how to stop it, and why you should care. And it affects more people than we realize. Just because we may not know someone who's been a victim of human trafficking, or we might not know of any stories in our community, it absolutely does not mean that we should just let it continue going on around us, or to think that it doesn't happen that often, because it happens every day, everywhere, to someone new, all the time. And that's the bottom line. It's something that we should be really socially conscious about, and I hope that after this, everyone feels the need to take action, to put an effort